Hello everybody, and welcome to the Friday edition of Video Clips. And as has been typical, I want to talk to you about consequences of what's going on. And then at the end, I have some remarks that I want to make about this overall, and I hope you'll listen until the end, because I think what I have to say is kind of important. I like to think everything I say is important. I'm doing my best to make it that way. All right, so here goes. This comes from a longtime member of ours. I'm in Montreal, the epicenter in Canada. Everyone advised that it's not possible to travel here or that I'd have to be quarantined. I was able to buy a train ticket easily and couldn't find anything about quarantines except for international travelers. In any case, my uncle, who was like a father, died. I figured I'd just go and deal with whatever happens. A well-meaning relative offered an N95 mask for the journey. There was no police asking where I was going and no drama, except that I thought I had missed a train as I found no humans when I first arrived at the train station. After I'd gone to visit my aunt and cousins, their neighbor told them that someone had been fined $5,000 per visitor for having a Seder dinner. You know how bad it is to have people practicing their religion. So they were terrified of having me go inside the house again. Their municipality is a hot spot because of a high concentration of senior residences. So you can understand a young woman going inside a house is a threat to the senior residences. I found it hard to believe that anyone would call the snitch line after a family member died, or that a cop would ticket me if I explained as a humanitarian visits are supposed to be allowed, or that the ticket would hold up in court. But they were too stressed and I didn't want to add to their grief, so I visited them on their front lawn. But I am angry that people are putting up with this. Also, I wonder what people think we're living for if we can't be near loved ones when they're grieving. I mean, just horrific stories like this. This person writes, the UK is getting ridiculous. Tantrums by hospital clinic workers have shut clinics so they can work in luxury from their detached home 10 minutes away. Others are furloughed until further notice, getting 80% of their salary to sit home and do nothing. Patients can't get access to doctors or dentists. This week I was warned under public order that he was on his way to visit a relative and was issued a warning. Where I live is getting increasingly unpleasant. Neighbors, visitors shout threats and scatter dead animals. Where I work in public health, the number of workers receiving counseling has increased. It takes me 4 hours instead of 2 hours to get to work. By the end of the day, there's no food in the shops to buy, so healthcare workers have to get up early on their day off in order to buy food. All right, here's one. My 86-year-old mother had a stroke on March 11th, right as the restrictions were starting. I'm in Alaska. She's in Oregon, where my dad and 2 sisters live. She was hospitalized, and of course we weren't sure how this was going to shape up, so I was getting my airline and hotel reservations ready to go be by her side during this ordeal. She has dementia, and the stroke made it 10 times worse. My sisters and dad were allowed to visit in the hospital, but the travel ban restrictions were recommended, and I wasn't sure if I'd end up going, so she reluctantly postponed. As time went on, my mom improved enough to be moved to a rehab center, but then the no visitation order was mandated, and even my sisters and dad were unable to see her. We were told we could only see her if she was in the dying process and only 2 at a time. She was transferred alone and didn't know where she was. She thought the police held her captive. She was desperately worried about her husband, my dad, who also has dementia. He didn't understand where his wife was. All we could do was contact her by phone. Because her dementia was so bad, we needed the nurse CNA's assistance to help her answer the phone. Many times, the facility wouldn't even answer the phone. We couldn't get accurate information on what therapy or procedures they were doing. Nobody seemed to know anything. My sister did attempt to visit outside her window, but got the wrong room and was so embarrassed when a man's voice shouted back at her. After 8 days, even though her rehabilitation wasn't nearly finished, my sister made arrangements to bring her home. At least she's reunited with her husband and her family. I'm not sure who this has affected the most. Each family member was greatly affected on their own way. Such helplessness. It was so unsettling. I felt like the Twilight Zone. The National Guard built a temporary taxpayer-funded hospital on the state fairgrounds here, different story, to attend to 750 COVID-19 overflow. Not a single patient is housed there. It cost $20 million. Sort of like here in Columbus, where our health director built hospitals in all the convention centers when the hospitals in every county were completely closed and shuttered. A father here this week shot and killed his family of 5 and then called 911 to be arrested. The police reports in Milwaukee show an enormous increase in domestic and civic cruelty to family members and innocent civilians. Beer and liquor bottles line our streets along with fast food containers, used latex, and other abandoned materials. I'm 66 years old and cannot see a doctor for anything other than a COVID-19 test. A family here was denied a visit to see their beloved dying 10-year-old son with cerebral palsy. He died alone. The majority of the virus cases in Wisconsin are in a few select counties, but the entire state is in lockdown. Commerce stats here say 45,000 small businesses are dead or dying with no relief in sight. We have countless stories of being denied care with fatal endings. Our state legislators allowed passage of a law to exempt healthcare workers, frontline administrators, and associated personnel from negligence lawsuits. Some might consider that to be open season on the patients. In my residential neighborhood at night, I hear cries of family strife and screams from homes and parking lots. There seems to be only one option coming: take back your freedom one way or another. Our governor was a state school superintendent and knows nothing of governing. Hospitals are shut down. Teachers are fully paid at home doing nothing other than yard work. Many complaints of veterinarian services jacking rates or not working with clients. Many folks just can't afford pet care, now affecting their mental health. And by the way, some disturbing articles are starting to surface about zoos which rely on visitors' fees to enter, and some of the zoos are basically saying they're going to have to feed the animals to other animals if things don't change because they don't have budgets to sustain this. So maybe some of the people who are buying this stupid, god-awful story but who care about animals will take the time based on this to look at the data a little further to see if you're really willing to let animals be fed to each other in the interest of promoting this fake pandemic. So this comes from BBC News. The world is at risk of widespread famines of biblical proportions caused by the coronavirus pandemic, the United Nations has warned. David Beasley, head of the World Food Program, said urgent action was needed to avoid a catastrophe. A report estimates that the number suffering from hunger could go from 135 million to more than 250 million people. In an interview, he also expressed fear that 30 million people and possibly more could die in a matter of months if the UN does not secure more funding and food. The WFP's senior economist, Arif Hussein, said the economic impact of the pandemic was potentially catastrophic for millions who are already hanging by a thread. It is a hammer blow for millions more who can only eat if they earn a wage, he said in a statement. Lockdowns and global economic recession have already decimated their nest eggs. It only takes one more shock like COVID-19 to push them over the edge. It wasn't COVID-19 that pushed them over the edge. It was the response. It was the idiotic, agenda-driven response, not the virus itself. This guy's talking about 30 million people dying and hundreds of millions of people starving. And we've got an idiot that writes to me on, I told you about it on Monday, who quotes the fake 80,000 deaths in the United States. You really, sir, want to write back to me and tell me that you think that what I just told you jives with that? You think that it's okay to lock everybody down in the United States? I mean, it's just amazing. All right. I wanted to share with you about my uncle. He's my father's identical twin. I've gotten pretty close to him since my father died of cancer 7 years ago, and then he himself had cancer in 2016. He's had health issues over the last few months, but he's been taking care of his wife, who passed away a week ago today. We had a graveside funeral and laid her to rest Thursday, and yes, there was a gathering of about 45 of us, gasp. But my poor uncle needed that support. Yesterday, he was taken by ambulance to a large hospital in Syracuse. He's had a stroke. Not one family member can be with him because his cancer was on the side of his head and he had radiation there. He can't remember everything or follow all that's told him. He's 78. He's intelligent, but he needs us. He needs his family, but we're locked out, not even one person at a time. I'm very concerned. His poor family just lost their mom. Now their father is alone in the hospital, beyond human compassion and comprehension. I just had to share and appreciate your prayers. And then here's an obituary somebody sent to me. Charles Thomas Schenck died April 27, 2020 at the age of 63 here in Ohio. Cuyahoga Falls High School graduate of 1974 and University of Akron graduate of 1996. He didn't die of the coronavirus. He died because of the pandemic. His fast progressing illness was left untreated and undiagnosed as the healthcare system did not treat the illness with urgency. So I get stories like this every day. And just amazing. So anyway, somebody asked me earlier this week what I look to for inspiration. I'm going to try to do this without crying. But anyway, during these troubled times, I go back and forth between extreme anger, which I've felt free to express in this setting because I think most of you share my anger about this, at the people who are doing this. These are people who hate humanity. And there's a book that I read, first I'll tell you this, a book I read called The Lucifer Effect many years ago. It was written by the psychologist who did an experiment at Stanford University, you're probably familiar with it, a prison experiment where mentally healthy, they had been tested, young males at Stanford University, did an experiment where half were guards and half were prisoners, and within 72 hours it went horribly wrong, and it had to be stopped early. And the book is about that episode and many others in history, in which people who insist that they're good people, who are given power, tend to abuse their authority. And boy, are we seeing that here. So I think that's what's going on. People who have become power hungry, and they're doing things that are completely irrational, that harm other people, and they seem to be completely untouched by any of it. And it just, I don't know how they can be. And if I hear one more time in response to starving people and businesses closing and families that are decimated and old people dying alone and children dying alone, we have to flatten the curve, flatten the curve. These people, to me, they seem like somebody from Mars put a chip in their head and they stop thinking, and I don't even know how to explain it. But anyway, I recently read, one of my favorite authors is Erik Larson. I think I've read everything he's written. His books are amazing. They're nonfiction and history driven. I love reading about history. And I particularly like reading about World War II history because a lot of reasons for that. But anyway, his most recent book is called The Splendid and the Vile. And it's about the period of time in the United Kingdom when Winston Churchill was prime minister, and the Germans it starts after Dunkirk, and the Germans are going to take France. It becomes really apparent that Hitler is going to conquer France. And Churchill is appropriately concerned about it because he knows that England will be next. And so France falls, and very interesting story, by the way. I've always said the mark of a good book is when you know what's going to happen and you still can't put it down, right? So during this period of time that follows, the Germans start bombing England, and there were tens of thousands of people, a couple thousand children who died. There were tens of thousands of buildings destroyed. Every night the sirens would start, and it was just horrific. And the Air Force did the best that it could, but Churchill knew that the only thing that was going to save the United Kingdom or England was the Americans getting involved in the war. And so he hung on for a year. It took a little over a year, actually, for the United States to get involved in the war. And had that not happened, I mean, the Brits would be speaking German right now for sure. But what I was touched by during this period of time is, first of all, the ability of the English to hunker down and deal with this as they had to. It was either that or they surrender and become part of the Third Reich. And also how Churchill was able to maintain a steady hand during that period of time. It was just nothing short of remarkable that he could do it. And somehow remained a leader, gave inspirational talks on the radio and to the public, and went to every bombed out city and got up and walked around and talked to people, got out of the car and walked around and talked to people. And so it was a reminder that perseverance can pay off. So, I think about World War II. We had a very bad man in Germany who I could say a lot of things about him, but he was a bad person, and he did a lot of terrible, terrible things, and eventually humanity won out. The difference between World War II and now, and this is the most consequential thing that's happened on the planet since World War II, but there's a big difference between what happened then and now. Then we knew where the enemy was. It was a single person and his followers. Today, the enemy is all over the world. We have the enemy of the people is the leader of our state. The enemy of the people is the health director of our state. The enemy of the people is the brainwashed people who support the story and allow it to go on. The enemy of the people is the governments of over 100 countries. The enemy of the people is the World Health Organization. It's going to take a lot more to beat this one than it did Hitler. This is much more pervasive. It's much more threatening than Hitler. But so help me God. Until I take my last breath on this planet, I will fight this, and I'm hoping you will too, because we have to rid the world of evil influence, and that's what we're being subjected to now. So, sorry for all the emotion involved in this. This emotion, the anger. I don't think I'm going to stop it, and I don't think I should. And the question I have for people who aren't sad or angry is, what's wrong with you? What is wrong with you? What has happened to you that you could allow this to happen and watch it happen and not respond the same way? I think that's it for now. More next week.